Hey there, ready for another deep dive? You ever wonder if all this information overload is actually making us any wiser?
It's a question that keeps coming up, isn't it? I mean, we've got more information at our fingertips than ever before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But does that translate to better decisions? Better understanding of the world?
Right. It's not quite as straightforward as it seems.
That's what we're going to dig into today.
Looking forward to it.
You sent over a ton of articles and research on this.
Yeah, a whole bunch.
And honestly, my head's still spinning a little.
It's a lot to unpack.
We're talking everything from ancient myths to, like, Facebook algorithms and AI.
It's all connected, in a way.
One thing that really stuck with me, you mentioned how in Goethe's time,
Oh, yeah.
only like 25% of the kids in his family survived to adulthood.
Yeah. Sadly, that wasn't uncommon back then.
But think about it. Today, the child survival rate is over 95% globally.
That's incredible progress, right?
Like if we're talking about medical knowledge, blood types, vaccines, antibiotics, that seems like wisdom, right? Information leading to tangible, life-saving results.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a clear case of information making a difference. But the sources also point out that it's not always that simple.
Okay, so it's not just a straight line from more information to more wisdom.
Not necessarily. They suggest information's not just about, like, presenting facts. It's about how we use those facts, how we understand the world, how we influence each other.
I'm listening. Give me an example.
Well, think about something like astrology.
Astrology.
It's been hugely influential for centuries. People have made major life decisions based on it, but does it have any real scientific basis?
Not that I know of.
Exactly. It shows how information, even if it's not true in a scientific sense, can still shape our realities and beliefs. And that leads to another fascinating point. You ready for this?
Hit me.
The power of stories. Early humans used stories to create large-scale cooperation. It's one of the things that helped them outcompete other human species.
Interesting. So stories, like, brought people together, helped them work as a team.
Exactly. It was like their social network. But like anything powerful, there's a flip side. Stories can also be used to mislead, spread misinformation, control people. It's how propaganda works.
It's a bit of a double-edged sword then.
For sure. It's all about how those stories are used, who's wielding them.
Wow. Okay. So we've got information that might not be true, stories that can be used for good or bad.
And this brings us to another big one. Bureaucracy.
Bureaucracy.
You gotta love it, but it exists for a reason.
Okay, I'll bite. Why?
Bureaucracy came about because societies got bigger, more complex. We needed ways to manage all that information, create order, systems.
Okay, that makes sense. But where's the downside?
Well, the sources argue that the focus on order can sometimes overshadow the search for truth.
So we can get so caught up in the rules, we lose sight of what's really important.
Exactly. They actually give this example of a woman named Vampantani. She was a priestess in ancient Mesopotamia.
Okay, a priestess. What happened to her?
She had to go to court to prove she was entitled to an inheritance. But she needed specific documents. It shows how these bureaucratic systems, even if they're meant to be fair, can get bogged down in procedures.
And sometimes the truth gets lost in the shuffle.
That's the idea. And they argue that this isn't just a problem with bureaucracy. It pops up throughout history. Religious institutions, political systems, even big corporations.
They all prioritize order over truth sometimes.
It's a recurring pattern. Think about the Catholic Church.
Okay.
They resisted changing the Bible for centuries.
Right, the Bible's seen as the ultimate truth.
Exactly. Even when new scientific discoveries came along that challenged their views.
So maintaining the existing structure, the order, was more important than incorporating new information.
That's the argument. And this leads to the question of, well, what about democracy? How do societies built on open discussion and debate handle this tension between truth and order?
That's a good question. We're supposed to be all about free speech, letting the truth emerge from all that back and forth.
Right. In theory, democracies rely on these decentralized networks of information. You've got the free press, independent courts, all these checks and balances.
Makes sense. But, some of the sources also warn about how technology can mess with those systems.
Oh, absolutely. They point to how some leaders weaken democracies from the inside, attack the courts, undermine the media, spread propaganda.
It's kind of unsettling to think about.
It really highlights how fragile these systems can be. It's a constant struggle between control and freedom, especially when it comes to information. And that brings us to the extreme end of the spectrum, totalitarian information networks.
Okay, now we're getting into some scary stuff. What are we talking about here?
They're talking about how technology can be used to create these incredibly powerful, oppressive systems of control. Like, take the Qin dynasty in ancient China.
Okay.
They were obsessed with controlling information, standardized everything, crushed dissent.
An early form of, like, information dictatorship.
You could say that, and then you have a more recent example, the Soviet Union under Stalin.
Surveillance, propaganda, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. It seems like this desire to control information, to shape reality for everyone, it keeps popping up throughout history. It's a recurring theme. And now, as we enter the age of AI...
Yeah, everyone's talking about AI. How does that change things?
They describe AI as a total game changer. It's this new type of information agent, making decisions, generating ideas independently.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It really is. It raises these fundamental questions about, who controls information, how we ensure AI is used responsibly.
It's exciting, but kind of scary, too.
Both, for sure. And one of the biggest concerns they highlight is algorithmic bias.
Algorithmic bias, what's that?
Basically, AI algorithms can inherit, even amplify human biases.
Oh, so they're not as objective as we might think.
Not necessarily, and that can lead to unfair, even harmful outcomes. There's this researcher, Joy Buolamwini.
I've heard of her.
She found that some facial recognition algorithms have trouble accurately identifying Black women.
Why is that?
Because the data used to train those algorithms was biased. It lacked diversity.
So even though AI is often seen as neutral, it can perpetuate existing inequalities.
That's the danger. And that's why they emphasize the need for human oversight. We can't just let algorithms run wild.
We need to be more careful, more thoughtful about how we develop this technology.
Exactly. And that brings us to another crucial point: global cooperation.
Okay, how does that fit in?
Well, they argue that AI could either bring humanity together or drive us further apart. We need to find ways to work together across national boundaries to manage the risks and harness the benefits.
So we can't just think about AI within our own countries. It's a global issue.
Absolutely. It's like dealing with pandemics or climate change. We need global solutions.
I'm starting to see the big picture here. It's not just about technology. It's about how we use it, how we govern it, how we work together.
It's about all of those things. And the decisions we make in the next few years will have a huge impact on the future.
No pressure then.
Right. It's a lot to think about. What are some of the things that have stood out to you so far?
Honestly, the idea that AI could create entirely new realities, it's like, whoa.
Mind-blowing, right?
What does that even mean for, like, the nature of truth, human experience?
Big questions. But maybe we should take a step back and give our listeners a summary of what we've covered so far.
Good idea. Where do we even start?
How about this? 10 key takeaways. First, information doesn't just reflect reality, it shapes it. Second, stories are incredibly powerful, but they can be used for good or for bad. Third, bureaucracy can sometimes obscure the truth.
Okay, that's 3. Keep going.
Fourth, powerful groups throughout history have often prioritized maintaining order over seeking truth. Fifth, democracy relies on open information networks and checks and balances. Sixth, technology can be used to undermine democratic processes. Seventh, totalitarian regimes have always used technology to control information. Eighth, AI presents new challenges and opportunities, raising questions about who controls information.
We're almost there.
Ninth, algorithmic bias is a serious concern that needs to be addressed. And 10th, global cooperation is essential for navigating the future of AI.
Wow, okay. That's a lot to digest, but it really helps to have it laid out like that.
It's a lot to cover.
We'll be back with more in part 2 of this deep dive. Stay tuned.
It's amazing how this whole conversation about information and power just keeps getting more and more relevant.
I know, right? Especially with AI advancing so rapidly.
It's not just some abstract thing anymore. AI is intertwined with everything. Governments, corporations, it's even creating new forms of power.
Which brings us to this idea of digital empires.
Yeah, that's a term that comes up a lot in the sources. A bit ominous, isn't it?
It does sound a little scary. What exactly are we talking about here?
Think about the big tech companies. Google, Amazon, Facebook.
Okay, I'm picturing their logos.
They've already got so much power just by centralizing information. They control these massive online platforms.
It's true. Google basically IS search. Amazon's the king of online shopping. And Facebook, well, everyone and their grandma is on Facebook.
Right. They're like the gatekeepers to the digital world. And with AI becoming more and more sophisticated, they're in a prime position to solidify that power even further.
So they become like digital emperors, ruling over their online domains. shaping how information flows to everyone else.
It's a real possibility. And the sources suggest it's not just corporations either. Governments are waking up to the potential of AI too.
Well, yeah. Governments have always been interested in controlling information. But what makes AI different?
AI gives them tools for surveillance and control that we couldn't have imagined a few years ago, like facial recognition combined with AI-powered databases.
It's like that episode of Black Mirror.
Right, it's not just science fiction anymore.
You mentioned China using these technologies to monitor their citizens.
Yeah, particularly in regions like Xinjiang. It's a pretty stark example of how AI can be used for social control and repression.
And it's not just China, is it?
Not at all. Governments around the world are adopting these AI-powered surveillance technologies, often with very little transparency or accountability.
It's a little unsettling.
Yeah.
What can we do to prevent these technologies from eroding our freedoms?
The sources really emphasize that democratic societies need to be proactive. We need clear limits on government surveillance, strong legal and ethical constraints.
So making sure there's democratic oversight and accountability when AI is used for these purposes.
Exactly, it's a balancing act. And it's not just government surveillance we need to be thinking about. Corporations are using AI to shape our behavior and decisions too.
Oh, absolutely. All those algorithms trying to figure out what we'll buy, what ads to show us. It's like, do we even have any control anymore?
It's a valid concern. The sources actually talk about YouTube's recommendation algorithm.
Everyone loves a YouTube rabbit hole.
Right. But what they found was that YouTubers figured out how to game the system. Posting outrageous content, misinformation, all that stuff got them more views and engagement.
Clickbait. It's like that old saying, if it bleeds, it leads.
Exactly. Algorithms are designed to keep us engaged, and outrage often generates more clicks than nuanced discussion. But what does that do to the quality of information we're getting?
Not great, I'm guessing.
No, not great at all. It creates a situation where truth and accuracy get lost in the race for attention.
The sources even connect this to political outcomes, don't they?
They do. They talk about the rise of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, how his supporters used YouTube to spread their message and build a following.
It's a reminder that we need to be really careful about the information we consume. We can't just passively accept what's being thrown at us.
Couldn't agree more. Developing media literacy skills is essential. We need to think about who's creating the content, what their motivations might be, and how algorithms might be shaping what we see.
Be critical. Think for yourself.
That's it. And we need more transparency from the companies that control these platforms.
So we're not just passive consumers. We need to be active participants in shaping the information ecosystem.
Exactly. Which brings us to the big overarching question.
Hit me with it.
The future of democracy in the age of AI. Can democracy survive the rise of these technologies?
Or will AI usher in some new era of digital authoritarianism?
That's what we're all trying to figure out.
So are we all doomed?
Well, the sources don't give us a simple yes or no answer. They recognize both the incredible potential of AI and the very real risks.
So it's not predetermined. We still have a say in how this plays out.
That seems to be their message. We have agency, but we need to be aware of the challenges and act decisively to protect our democratic values and institutions.
What can we do? I mean, what can regular people do in the face of all this? It feels kind of overwhelming.
One of the most important things, they say, is to push for democratic oversight of AI. We need to demand transparency from governments and corporations about how they're using these technologies.
Hold those in power accountable.
Right. We also need to support the development of ethical guidelines for AI, making sure these technologies are used for good, not for control and oppression.
So it's not just about the technology itself. It's about the values that guide its development and use.
Exactly. And it's not just about rules and regulations. It's about fostering a culture of critical thinking and responsible innovation, both within the tech industry and in society as a whole.
So education is a big part of this.
Hugely important. We need to have these conversations about AI everywhere, not just in universities and think tanks, but in our homes, schools, communities.
Democratizing the conversation about AI, making sure everyone has a voice.
Exactly. And that leads to another crucial aspect of this whole thing, addressing algorithmic bias.
Right. We talked about that earlier with facial recognition algorithms, but it's a much bigger issue, isn't it?
It really is. Algorithmic bias can show up in so many ways, from hiring algorithms that discriminate against certain groups to loan algorithms that deny opportunities based on your zip code.
It's like we're baking existing inequalities into the very systems that are supposed to be objective.
That's the danger. And it requires a multi-pronged approach to fix it. We need to make sure the data used to train these algorithms is diverse and representative.
So tackling bias in the data itself is crucial.
Absolutely. But it's not just about the data. The algorithms themselves need to be designed with fairness and equity in mind from the very beginning.
It can't be an afterthought. It has to be baked into the design process.
Right. We need new methods for auditing algorithms, identifying and mitigating bias before it leads to real-world harm. And this requires expertise from all sorts of fields, not just computer science, but sociology, ethics, law.
It's a team effort, bringing together different disciplines, different perspectives.
Exactly. We need to think about the social and ethical implications of AI from the start, not as an afterthought. It's a real shift in mindset.
A shift in how we think about technology, but also about society itself.
Right, and this shift needs to extend beyond just AI to encompass the whole information ecosystem. We need to rethink our relationship with information itself.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How do we do that?
The sources emphasize becoming more discerning. Just because we have access to tons of information doesn't mean it's accurate or helpful.
So it's not about the quantity of information, but the quality and how we evaluate it.
Exactly. And it's also about recognizing the power of information to shape our perceptions.
What do you mean?
Think about how brands use marketing and advertising.
Okay.
They're not just selling products. They're selling lifestyles, identities, aspirations. They're creating realities.
They build a whole world around their product to make you feel like you need it.
Exactly. And this power of information to shape realities, it's even more potent in the digital age. We're bombarded with messages constantly.
It's information overload.
It really is. That's why they stress the importance of critical thinking, becoming more aware how information is used to influence us.
So we can build up our defenses, not be so easily swayed.
Right. Develop our own internal filters. It's about being mindful of what we consume, being aware of potential biases, not taking everything at face value.
So be skeptical, but not cynical.
Exactly. And actively seek out different perspectives. Challenge our own assumptions. The sources remind us that truth is often multifaceted, complex.
It's not always black and white. There are shades of gray.
Exactly. And it's about being open to dialogue, even with people we disagree with.
Being willing to listen and learn, even if it's uncomfortable sometimes.
It's how we grow. And the sources also talk about the importance of supporting institutions that are committed to truth and accuracy.
Like investigative journalism, fact-checking websites, things like that.
Exactly. We need to invest in those structures that help ensure a healthy information ecosystem. And we need to hold social media companies accountable for their role in spreading misinformation.
So it's about creating a system that values truth, not just clicks and engagement.
That's the goal. It's a collective effort. Individuals, governments, the tech industry, we all have a role to play.
This has been a really thought-provoking conversation. As we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the biggest one is that AI is a double-edged sword. It has incredible potential, but it also carries significant risks.
So approach it with cautious optimism.
Exactly. The future of AI is ultimately in our hands.
That's a powerful thought. We'll continue this conversation in the next part of our deep dive. Stay with us. Wow, we've really gone deep on this one, haven't we? Ancient empires, AI, the future of democracy. It's made me look at how we interact with information in a whole new way.
It really is a complex and ever-changing landscape, isn't it?
Yeah.
But even with all these technological advances, there's one fundamental thing that hasn't changed much at all.
Yeah, you're right. And it keeps popping up in all these sources. The need for stories.
Yeah.
We just can't seem to get away from them.
Exactly. Humans are storytelling creatures. Always have been. We use stories to make sense of the world around us, to connect with each other, to build a shared understanding of things. It's how we find meaning in all the chaos.
It's like our brains are wired for stories. But like you said before, there's a flip side to this, right?
Oh, definitely. The sources highlight how stories can be incredibly powerful. They can inspire us, bring us together, motivate us to achieve amazing things. Think about the creation of nations, religions, social movements, all driven by powerful stories.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But the sources also warn about how stories can be used to mislead, manipulate, even incite violence.
Right. It's that double-edged sword again. Stories tap into our emotions, and those emotions can be used for good or bad. Sometimes it's hard to tell where inspiration ends and manipulation begins.
It makes you think about AI, doesn't it? Now we have AI that can generate stories, and some of them are incredibly convincing.
That's one of the big concerns that comes up. AI being used to create propaganda, misinformation, deepfakes that are almost indistinguishable from reality. It's a whole new level of information warfare.
It's almost like a battle for our minds. If we can't even trust what we see and hear, how do we make good decisions? How do we know what's real anymore?
It raises some profound questions about truth, how we define it, and the importance of critical thinking. We need to be incredibly discerning and develop new strategies for separating fact from fiction.
So we need to level up our information game. We can't just be passive consumers anymore.
Absolutely. And that's where media literacy and critical thinking skills come in. We need to equip ourselves and future generations with the tools to navigate this complex information landscape. It's not just about memorizing facts, it's about understanding how information is created, how it's presented, how it's used to influence us.
So it's less about being skeptical of everything and more about having the ability to evaluate information and make good judgments.
That's it. Being aware of our own biases, challenging our own assumptions, being open to different perspectives.
It's like intellectual humility, recognizing that we don't have all the answers, and being willing to engage in thoughtful debate, even when we disagree.
That's essential for a healthy information environment. And the sources also talk about the importance of supporting institutions that are dedicated to truth and accuracy.
Like investigative journalism, fact-checking organizations, those kinds of things.
Exactly. We need to invest in these structures that help create a more balanced and informed public discourse. And we need to hold social media companies accountable for the spread of misinformation on their platforms.
It's about creating a system that prioritizes facts over clicks. A digital world where truth matters.
That's the goal. And it's going to require a lot of work. Individuals, governments, the tech industry, we all need to step up.
It's a good reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping the future of information. This isn't just something that happens to us. We have agency. We have a choice.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, there's one final thought from the sources that I want to leave our listeners with.
What is it?
Even with all the challenges we've talked about, they urge us not to give in to despair or cynicism.
So don't lose hope.
Exactly. They remind us that humans are incredibly creative and resilient. Throughout history, we've faced enormous obstacles and found ways to overcome them. We invent new technologies, build new systems, tell new stories that expand our understanding of the world.
It's a reminder that we're capable of amazing things when we work together.
I agree. And the future isn't set in stone. It's still being written. It's a story we're all creating together.
So let's make it a good one. It's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, keep those questions coming, keep exploring, keep thinking critically, and keep the conversation going. Until next time.